All right, I'm going to talk about Mao. He's an incredibly consequential figure. He's, for the 20th century, he's one of the most consequential political or military figures. And he's also one of the most important figures in Chinese history of any century. And he's also a terribly significant military and political theorist. And this is not an endorsement of Mao. It is rather just an accurate description of his global and enduring importance. And think about China. Historically, it's represented, I don't know, a third of the world's population, a third of the world's trade. That's a big slice of humanity. Moreover, Mao's theories have been used by many enemies of the United States to take over failing states from within in order to assert dictatorial rule. He is also probably the most brilliant and most famous psychopath in human history, and that is saying a lot. So here we go. All right, this presentation is based on the first 8 volumes of Stuart Schramm's collected works of Mao. What Schramm did is he compared Mao's complete works as published in the 1950s to whatever he could find as the earliest version of whatever it was. And then he reinserted whatever had been cut in the italics. So tonight, watch the italics. And Mao didn't put all of his best ideas in one place. He scattered them all over the place. And so what I've done is prepared like a jigsaw puzzle of all of these different ideas. And then in order to make it comprehensible to you of all these random little tidbits, you have to have like a coat rack to hang all the hangers, and that's called a simple framework, and I'll get there. But in your own lives, when you've got all kinds of complicated things to transmit to others, you can look at what I'm doing tonight, and you can do it for other things as well. So here we go with good old Mao. And oh, by the way, a lot of those 8,000, 7,000 pages weren't that interesting. So in a way, you owe me. All right. So, all right. These are major military theorists, just to run you through them. Clausewitz is the West's major military theorist of bilateral conventional land warfare. Sun Tzu is Han civilization's great theorist of how you maintain power in a continental empire, multilateral world using coercion and deception. The two fellows on the right are maritime theorists. In a way, they're writing the missing chapters of Clausewitz that doesn't talk about naval warfare at all. The top one is Alfred Thayer Mahan, the Naval War College's finest. And what he's writing about are the prerequisites for and strategic possibilities for maritime power. And the Briton underneath him there, Sir Julian Corbett, is writing about how a maritime power, i.e. Britain, can defeat a continental power, i.e. Germany or France. But all of them are writing about warfare between states, and Mao is a different event. Mao has to do with triangle building. The term triangle building comes from Clausewitz. Clausewitz has this nice little passage here where he's talking about these abstractions, passion, creativity, and rationality as being mainly, but not exclusively, associated respectively with the people, military, and government. A state has full-up military and civil institutions that have some connection to their people. But an insurgent is going to be building these things from the ground up. So that's what Mao is doing, is he's actually taking over the host from within by building a shadow government and eventually taking power. And many of the decolonizing world after World War II were really sick of the West. They've been colonized, didn't want to hear anything about them. But it seemed as if the Soviets or the Chinese perhaps offered a better model, the communists. And many thought that the Chinese, with Mao, offered the better model. Why? Because the decolonizing parts of the world were also agricultural and underdeveloped, unlike Russia, which had quite a military, an industrial base. And so they thought Mao was the more relevant guy. All right, here's Mao at his iconic moment. He's proclaiming the victory of the communists in the Chinese Civil War. China had been a broken state basically since 1911, when the last dynasty had fallen and the country had broken out into a multilateral civil war that he eventually wins. And I'm going to be talking tonight about Mao's theories from the 1920s and 30s when he had the time to write. But there's a lot more to Mao than just that. He had quite a track record. Once he won the Civil War, he imposed a social revolution. What's that? It's more than a political revolution. You're not just replacing the government. You're going to wipe out entire social classes. And I don't mean then, hey, here's your one-way ticket out of here kind of way. No, a social revolution is here's a mass grave, dig it, and then you're in it kind of way. So if you look at these statistics of Chinese deaths in many of their wars, this is from much of the Maoist period, I think it's 45 to 75. What you'll notice, the figures in white, I believe, are civilian deaths, not military deaths. And it gets really quite ugly. There are more Chinese civilian deaths here than all deaths in World War II. And then for those of you who think the Chinese are all great long-term strategists, you need to ponder these numbers. How is it possible to kill so many of your own? That's generally not a mark of good strategy. Moreover, most of them died during the Great Famine, which was the only nationwide famine in Chinese history. Why? Because it's not caused by the weather. It's caused by policies set in Beijing. During the Great Leap Forward, Mao put all the peasants on communes. That meant the party was in control of the food supply, i.e. who lives and who dies. You don't get a meal, you're very dead. In addition, he decentralized industry, and you can see these backyard furnaces pictured here. As a result of this, production collapses, agriculture and industrial, but Mao keeps exporting food. Why? Because that's his pocket change. That is a major source of government income if he wants to be able to do anything. So they keep exporting food. As a result, 40 million Chinese starved to death, primarily in rural areas and disproportionately peasant girls, the least valued members of society. The statistic of 40 million deaths comes from this book by Yang Jisheng, who's written the definitive work. The English translation is but one volume. The Chinese original is 3. Yang worked as a journalist for many years, which gave him access to provincial archives, where he surreptitiously investigated the statistics of people who are starving to death, including his father, for whom he wrote this book to serve as an eternal tombstone. So, on the one hand, Mao is the military genius who puts Humpty Dumpty back together again when nobody else could, and they tried for the previous 40 years. On the other hand, he is the psychopath incapable of running an economy in peacetime. Yet, many Chinese revere him as a national hero. Why? Because in their minds, certainly of the Han, the preponderant group in China, one of the key things that their country should and must be is a great power. And Mao, by reunifying China under the banner of communism and then fighting the coalition of all the major capitalist powers to a stalemate in the Korean War, or in their mind, a victory, that constitutes ending what they consider the era of humiliations that started in the mid-19th centuries and end with the communist revolution. So he's a hero at home. All right. To understand Mao's theories, I need to put it in the context of the wars that he fought. So in 1911, Qing dynasty collapses. The country shatters into a multilateral warfare among warlords of these provincial leaders. And on this map, you can see the different colors and shadings. Those are different warlord areas. But the Nationalist Party and the Communist Party form a united front in 1923 in order to eliminate these warlords. And so Kai-shek, who's the head of the Nationalist Party, Generalissimo, not just a general, he is the man who's leading the northern expedition to fight off all the warlords, except he stops midway near his power base in Shanghai, and he turns on the communists, massacres them in droves. This is the White Terror. Why? Because he thinks that while he's away fighting, they're trying to take over his government. He's correct. So he keeps on moving there. There's a nominal unification of China under nationalist rule when this takes place. In addition, once he's done with that, then he wants to eliminate the communists for good. And so he runs a series of 5 encirclement campaigns around their base areas that are scattered in South China. The primary base area is also called a Soviet, is the Jiangxi Soviet. And on the 5th encirclement campaign, Chiang Kai-shek is finally successful, and he sends them off on the Long March up to way up north in desolate Yan'an. Long March is a real misnomer. It's the long route, and the communists lose 95% of their forces. I believe in English, decimate, lose, it means to lose 10%. Losing 95%, I think you need a whole new verb for what's happened to you. But Chiang Kai-shek doesn't wipe them out because he's suffering from divided attentions. When the West did the original, it's both the United States and Europe. The United States does its original America First thing with a holy smooth tariff, putting tariffs up to historic highs, and then everybody, of course, retaliates. So now everybody's got high tariffs. Well, here's trade-dependent Japan that's always cooperated with everybody, and suddenly they're toast. And so their solution is autarky, and they need an empire large enough to be autarkic. And so then that's when they invade Manchuria in 1931. So Chiang Kai-shek has all of a sudden lost this area from China that's greater than Germany and France combined. It's a mess. And so he's trying to balance what to do about Japanese versus communists. The Japanese don't quit with Manchuria. They stabilize the place. They make massive infrastructure developments. They transform it into the most developed part of Asia outside of the home islands, but they keep on going. And it gets so bad that the communists and the nationalists form a second united front because they're facing this lethal threat called Japan. And they organized that in December 1936 in what's known as the Xi'an incident, and the Japanese react viscerally because they look at it, and the nationalists have gone over to the dark side because they've joined up with the communists. And this is when the Japanese escalate in 1937, go down the Chinese coast, up the Yangtze River. But then they wind up stalemating. Once they get beyond the Chinese railway system, which isn't that great in this period, the Japanese can't stabilize the place, and the Soviets start adding more aid, and we add more aid. It's a mess. So the Japanese decide they're going to cut Western aid to the Chinese, and that's where Pearl Harbor comes in. That's what the attack of Pearl Harbor is all about, is telling Americans to stay out of Asia, which, of course, we did just the opposite. And then the Nazis interpret their alliance with the Japanese broadly to declare war on the United States. So when that happens, you have a regional war that had already been going on over Poland in Europe, and this other war that had been going on since 1931 in Asia. They unify into a global world war. Mao understood that he was dealing with 3 layers of warfare, nested wars, that he was fighting a civil war against the nationalists, within a regional war against Japan, and then after Pearl Harbor, there's going to be a global war that will eventually morph into a global Cold War. Most of his writings are written before Pearl Harbor, so he's going to focus on the first 2 layers of what's going on here. So after the World War II is over, Mao goes after the nationalists full bore, and the Japanese have already very much weakened the nationalists, and Mao wins the Civil War. Okay, these are the wars. Now, I promised you a simple frame.